Welcome to the Changemakers podcast, brought to you by Graf-Martin Communications, where we discuss ministry, marketing, and leadership for good. I'm your host, Ellen Graf-Martin, and each episode you get to join me in conversation with some of the most interesting changemakers and groundbreakers from across Canada and beyond. This is a special episode of the Changemakers podcast because today I'm introducing you to Compassion Canada's new president and CEO, and my friend, Allison Alley. If you're listening to this podcast, be sure to also head over to our YouTube channel, linked in the show notes, and watch our conversation. I'm excited to be bringing you this episode because I think it will give you an inside look at Allison, who is one of the most intentional and fun thought leaders I know, and her heart for Compassion Canada. In this episode, I talked to Allison about her calling into ministry early in her career with Youth with a Mission, and her later transition from working in corporate finance to ministry with Compassion Canada. We talk about the humility that's required in leadership, and I ask her whether child sponsorship actually works. I can't wait for you to listen in on our conversation. Let's dive in. So glad you're here today. So Allison, okay, I think that our history goes further than just 4 years.
Okay.
Because I was privileged to get to be part of what felt like a family event at your, what was the official title?
The event itself was the Succession Gala. So it was the transfer of leadership, the passing of the torch from Barry Slonwhite, our 36-year veteran, to me. And that happened October 25th.
Yeah, that's no big deal. 36 years, 36 years.
Yeah.
And then you coming in. So we're going to talk about that. Okay. You know, it was actually a video that your brilliant husband, Tommy, put together. And he is a cinematographer. So it was a very good video. And he actually reminded me, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I thought this is why I think Allison and I get each other, is that you started out in ministry with YWAM.
Yes.
I was with Operation Mobilization. Those are like cousins, an American cousin and a European cousin, but they're cousins and they get each other. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So like tell us, okay, you were with YWAM. Where were you? What were you doing?
Okay, yes. So very much so. My calling into ministry, which then led eventually a decade down the road into my calling into compassion, started at YWAM, as you said. And so I was doing the DTS program, the Discipleship Training School, and my outreach was primarily in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And the way I would describe it is it really was my first time away from the nest. And the first time that I was thrust into a different cultural context where, of course, in many ways, I learned so much more about myself, but also the world around me. And it was in Thailand that I was confronted with not just poverty, but child poverty and child mortality in a way that just rocked me and was a burden that I had since that time.
And you met your husband in YWAM also.
I did, yes. And so I often say, I left with this sense of calling into ministry, this burden for kids, and this attractive guy that I started to get to know quite a bit more after that. But yeah, my husband was leading the School of Missions and Evangelism and really had a heart for the nations, would have been the way that he expressed it at the time, and was really passionate about evangelism and reaching the poor and the marginalized.
And where was your DTS? It was in Hawaii?
Well, we were suffering for Jesus in Honolulu, Hawaii, which is kind of how you choose where you're going to serve the Lord at that ripe young age. But yeah, we were at the Oahu base.
And, I really believe, and maybe it's just because I grew up into adulthood in OM. I spent 5 years with OM. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't.
I was with him for 5 years. And I think there is a bit of a debt that the church around the world owes to these programs that take young, impressionable people with a lot of enthusiasm and work to shape them and expose them, not just to people like the marginalized in places like Thailand, or for me, I was in Central America or wherever they are, but also working on a team. And a cross-cultural team. I know the team I was on was 214 people from 40 nations, including like Sudan and the Philippines and Holland and the United States and Canada. So you learn a lot about leadership and about ministry in that setting, don't you?
Oh my goodness. It's something that I'm not sure I appreciated quite as much at the time, to the degree that I do now as I look back. Because exactly as you said, here I was, still a teenager, late teenager, early adulthood, traveling with about a dozen people from 10 different countries, being thrust into a context that none of us had grown up in, that were dependent on our ability to listen well to one another, to navigate new territory with one another, to trust one another, to defer to one another. And absolutely the leadership learning that happens in that real life context is pretty significant.
It's incredible. And I don't know if you were similar, but we also had people who had been doing this their whole life, their whole adult life. And I learned personally a model of mentoring through that, because we had people who were just so committed to this. They'd been doing this, missions for 30 years and the mentoring. And I think, isn't that amazing preparation for you?
Yeah.
For what you were going to go into, I guess 17 years later, is that right? That you would be walking into a season of being mentored by someone with an enormous amount of ministry experience, because it takes a humility to be mentored, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely it does. And I remember with fondness that we were connected with a couple actually from the United States that had been living in Thailand for about 12 years at the time. And the way that we were able to, as you said, learn from them and get best practices from them, and the way that they just invited us in to their new context was pretty rich. Yeah.
And a teachability is one of the things that I have learned is the most winsome in a leader to me.
Yeah.
And you learn that there, right? You're there to learn. And it is kind of like this weird experience where everyone is it not kind of a weird thing? When I look back on it now, I'm like, oh, I feel for our leaders. We were all these enormously enthusiastic young people who wanted to learn everything, kind of thought they knew everything. And, and are just going. So would you recommend this for, my niece is actually in Muskoka right now on a DTS. Do you recommend this as a starter career in ministry?
Yeah. You know what? I would say that the idea of a gap year, which is really what it was, and taking the time to go away to learn, to experience new things, to challenge your perspective and your biases and your blinders that you have when you've been raised in one context. For me, my context was a primarily Caucasian, wealthy, affluent, privileged household from a global perspective. It didn't feel that way to me, but that was my perspective. And so, I think it's incredibly rich for young people to be confronted with their own cultural context and lens and viewpoint in ways that you just can't get without getting into, a different context and a different environment. Of course, what we know in hindsight is these young leaders have a zest, and I think a God-given zest and desire to change the world and to impact those around them. But what actually happens is that you are changed. As
Absolutely.
I said, your perspectives grow, you learn in a way that I think, young people should really look for those opportunities and lean into them.
And I think part of that leaning in, and for me, and I suspect for you as well, I suspect that this is true for most people who would go on a trip like this, is that God gets bigger. And I think for me, it meant that I saw that the God who was so real to me was just as real, if not more real, to someone like we had people on our team from Sudan, and they had just walked through horror. And people who, it was a reality for them that their church could be bombed, or that had gone through childhood poverty in ways I would have never experienced. But God was just as present there. And just as real there. And it blows your perspective of God, doesn't it?
Oh my goodness. And you learn so much. So one of the things that I reflect on often that started there in Thailand, but certainly I encounter as I travel now with compassion is, we would say things like trusting God for our daily bread, as young baby Christians. And to actually sit in a home with a family who is trusting God for their literal daily bread, for the opportunity to feed their family that day, having no idea what the next day would bring. And the depth of faith and dependence and trust that they have is just something that I continue to be in awe of compared to, at times, oftentimes actually, the shallowness that can come with my own faith when I can be so self-sufficient and really can provide myself and my family with what they need, right?
Yeah, it's amazing how God sets the stage early, and I think there is that principle of when you're faithful in the little things, he gives you bigger and bigger and bigger things.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing that today because now you have this title that is a big title, CEO and President of Compassion Canada. Compassion International Canada or Compassion Canada?
You got
Compassion Canada.
Yeah.
And that's a big title to carry. And so but we were talking earlier and you were saying that it doesn't feel so heavy right now.
No.
It may have felt heavier during succession planning and timing, but it doesn't feel so what makes it lighter now?
So what I would say is, first of all, God has clearly called me into ministry, as I mentioned. It was so evident to me in my time in Thailand. It sat on the back burner of my life for about a decade until God really reawakened my husband and I into this life of ministry together. He actually used my own kids and my recognition that they were afforded certain opportunities just because of the privileged household they were born into to really open up my eyes again to the needs of kids around the world and in my own backyard at home. And so, that led me on a journey to leave my career, to, sponsor one child and to do what we could as a family to just get engaged, which eventually led me to Compassion. And the point of this being, there was a sense of calling into ministry and calling into compassion. And then just these step-by-step, or this path that, my family went on and that I went on, that was just a series of obedient steps that led in time to this moment that comes with a sense of peace and confidence that God who calls you will equip you. And when it's not something that you asked for or looked for, but he led you to so obviously, you can rest a little bit more peacefully in that.
And I think, so this isn't a contradiction. That's not the right thing, but you are one of the most intentional people I think I know, but you didn't join Compassion. How many years ago was it?
7 years ago.
Okay, 7 years ago, saying, I am going to be the next CEO and president. You were volunteering, right?
Yes.
Like you started by volunteering with the organization.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and I think I remember you telling, so you've told me something that really stuck with me, that what actually prompted it was around redecorating your daughter's bedroom. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
That has so stuck with me. Maybe tell us that story because that has stuck with me and I think someone needs to hear that.
Yeah, good. Okay, so we're going back now probably about 8 years ago. I had just had my second daughter, Scarlett. My oldest daughter, Ireland, was about 2.5 years old. And there was this very provocative moment in time that really my husband and I would call this reawakening. In hindsight, again, I can see how God had been preparing me for that and creating the environment and the people around me that were informing our thinking and challenging our life. And so I remember sitting in my basement, holding my youngest daughter, Scarlett, and watching my husband and my oldest playing in the distance. And I just became overwhelmed. And there was this sense of like void and emptiness, which was contrasted with the reality that I really had everything I ever wanted. Like, amazing husband, great career. We were living in our dream home, healthy kids, all of those things.
You were working in financial services, is that right?
That's right. I was a financial advisor at the time. And there was an emptiness, and God used that moment to make me realize I was missing it. We were missing it as a family. And shortly after, and this is, to answer your question, I was prompted again by this burden for kids living in poverty. And in my discipline, as you said, started researching and thinking, who's out there? What are they doing? And how can we get involved? And I came across a photo essay by a gentleman named James Mollison called Where Children Sleep. And it shows really provocative photos of kids in their modest sleeping quarters around the world, kids sleeping in tire holes on the street. And I was moved, as you can imagine, was really moved by that. And I remember closing the laptop. I was in my kitchen and walking upstairs. My daughter had been calling me, and I walked into her room, and she was sitting on her bed in this beautiful, picturesque, Pinterest-worthy bedroom. And it broke me. It absolutely broke me. I literally went down on my knees And it was this stark contrast of opulence and affluence against extreme poverty. And the fact that I felt like I was standing in this gap and I had a choice to make. And hear me when I say, Pinterest-like rooms are not wrong and bad. That's not the point. It was a reflection of my heart and the fact that I was so narrowly focused on my own girls, on giving them everything they could ever want and more than they could ever need, while ignoring the calling that we had as a family to be advocates for kids.
Oh, that's so good. There is a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And I think because I have a daughter a year younger than your youngest.
Yeah.
And I think because of how I've grown into this ministry and leadership, I feel like my first job is to lead her.
Yeah.
Into understanding. We just had a conversation yesterday about philanthropy, which with a 7-year-old who has a limited attention span is a challenge, but it's also good. And talking about what does it mean when we I often ask her the question, do we have more than we need?
Yeah.
And if we have more than we need, what is our responsibility with that? It isn't to build a bigger barn. We talk about building a bigger table, not a bigger barn. So that is just in giving, but that also is in living.
Yes.
And for your family, it has meant that you're living this out. So what has that looked like for your family as you've lived this out?
Mm-hmm. First of all, a few things that you said there resonated with me. Number one, I do hold pretty significant convictions that God has called me first and foremost to be an advocate for my kids and to do whatever I can to invest in them, to advocate for them, to challenge them and grow them. And I think one of the ways that we can do that and really disciple our kids well is to help them understand what's unique about their context and how other people really live. And as an advocate for kids, one of the things that excites me is the opportunity for them to speak up for one another, to learn from one another, to challenge one another, and in ways that we can't always do as adults. And so getting my kids involved in this is something that I'm pretty excited about. The other thing I just comment based on what you said is a phrase we have at Compassion, a reflection point maybe is a better thing to call it, is that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, but enough.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can often think that poverty is just economic, but really it's spiritual and social and physical and cognitive and relates to the, created world around us. And in many ways, we in a Western context wouldn't think that we are impoverished. But so often the affluent lifestyle can come with all kinds of poverty or lack in interpersonal relationships, in depth of faith, in connectedness with those around us. And so, that's a wrestle point that I ask a lot for our family with our kids is how much is enough? What is sufficiency, which is what God has called us to, this abundant life of sufficiency. I forget the question you asked me.
You know what? This is good. And you know what? So, because I'm an Enneagram 7, we were talking about that. How much is enough?
Yeah.
Is like my life, I think my life quest, right? How much is enough?
Yeah.
And so yes, I need to teach my daughter that. And my brain is going on so many ways. But I think one of the things that you taught me years ago, now, it feels like 10 years ago, but I think it was probably like 2 years ago, is changed people, change circumstances. Mm-hmm. And that touches on that, what is the opposite of poverty? It's enough. And so what does that mean? Like, how did people change? And I know that I was a changed person who then was released into changing circumstances for others.
Yeah.
And I still get to do that. So what does that look like so for a family, that was your story, it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
So how do we live that out at home? How do we live that out at work? How do we live that out globally? It sounds like, we can donate to an organization like Compassion and sponsor a child. We can change the life of another person. But is there a bigger answer to that?
Yeah. Wow. That's the question, right? First of all, Compassion doesn't just believe, but we have seen time and time again how changed people do influence change around them. And we've seen how changed kids can change their families, and changed families can change churches, and changed churches can change communities. And we are believing that enough change communities can change entire nations. But it relates back to, the calling of Christ's followers is to share the gospel message and to allow people to be transformed through the love of Jesus, and then to be transformed into his image so that they can then impact those around them. And, I think it starts for us on asking God to say, break our hearts for what breaks yours, and help us then to live that out in really practical, everyday ways, where maybe something that could be unexpected to hear from a global nonprofit leader. But I really feel deep convictions that God calls us to care for the neighbors in our own backyard first. It's very clear in Scripture. And so what does it look like to be that expression of Christ to those around you? And then to ask yourself, how does that live out globally? Not just how do we do it globally, but how can we connect with people who are already there so they can be a tangible expression of Christ in their communities as well?
So, this is your mission start really rearing its ugly head.
Yeah.
Beautiful head, incredible head. Is that where, you're called to go and make disciples.
Yeah.
And in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Like, I'm sure, how many mission sermons did you hear on that over your time with YWAM? For me, with my time with OM, it's like burned into my memory. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, we're called to our Jerusalem, our Judea, our Samaria, and we could go into that big. But have you seen this? So my husband and I, we sponsor a couple kids through Compassion and really believe in compassion. And your maternal health program is just, it's called Change Her Story, literally. So this is the change. So can you tell me about someone you have seen that has actually been transformed? Like, does my sponsorship actually matter? I think that there are lots of people who would ask that. Like, does it actually matter that we do this?
Yeah. So here's the thing. The intellectual answer is that, yes, it does. Compassion is right? Yep. Compassion is the only, actually, child sponsorship organization that has independent academic research that shows our long-term effectiveness. So kids in our program are more likely to stay in school, to get white-collar jobs, to be leaders in their communities and in their churches, and to be released from the chains of poverty and equipped and mobilized to transform more lives around them. That happens time and time again. One of the stories that I'm reminded of, so a friend of mine, Tony Beltran, he grew up in the Dominican Republic and in a really impoverished town. And he would go out and offer to shine shoes for the tourists who came to town. And his story would be, it wasn't uncommon for them at nighttime to have no food on the table. And his mom would often excuse herself, wash the dishes so that, she didn't have to sit there and watch the pain of their family. His father was a man of faith, and he would often pray these prayers at dinner time and say, "Thank you, Lord, for your abundant love and for the way you lavish love on us." And Tony used to get frustrated because he would say, who is this God of love and abundance and protection and provision? Because he wasn't seeing that played out practically in his life. And so Tony's story is eventually his local church, who partnered with Compassion, invited him in to be part of the child development program. And it was there that he was known, loved, and protected by members of his local community. He was connected with a loving sponsor who told him not just that God has plans and purposes for him, but again, in a tangible, real way, express those to him in the form of education and food and medical care and leadership development. And Tony's story is that in time he finished high school, he then went to college, he then got a master's, and fast forward, and last year, Tony was announced as the new national director of Compassion Dominican Republic. And so he is now partnering with hundreds of churches across his country to invest in over 100,000 kids so they too can be invested in and released from poverty.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff that is incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that his story isn't the only story like that, because I read your magazine. So I know that this isn't the only story like this. And Okay, so I want to talk to you. I don't know if we'll talk right now. Maybe we'll park this question. I want to talk about the model of ministry because you mentioned that he gets to work with churches locally. So he works with churches in the Dominican Republic. And I mean, there's different models of ministry.
Yeah.
But as I understand it, Compassion's model is that Canadians help fund local projects through the local church in local contexts where people understand how, because there's this idea, and I think that there's people who are pretty turned off by the idea of, that we are the saviors of the world here in Canada. Because are we? No.
Turns out we're not.
Turns out we're not.
We're not even the center. The center of the church is not in the West anymore.
Where is the center of the church?
In many areas of Africa, the church is like Latin America. The church is alive and thriving and growing in ways that we in the West would long for.
And so we actually need them to help influence us.
Absolutely.
But we do have finances and we've been given more than we need.
Yeah.
And so how do finances actually help a person like Tony? How do they actually work through that local church?
Yeah. Really good question. So first of all, as you said, our model is that we are Christ-centered, child-focused, and church-based. And so we partner with almost 8,000 churches in 25 countries and serve over 2 million kids.
And that's Compassion Canada
Compassion
specific.
International.
Or Compassion International.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that's right.
That's a lot of kids. 8 million? Did you say?
Over 2 million
2 million kids.
Yeah, partner with 8,000 local churches in 25 countries. Yeah.
It's a lot of lives.
It is. And so, why the church? There's kind of a few layers to it, and I'll keep it simple for the sake of time, but it's, why the church and then why that indigenous partnering with people already on the ground. Well, not just we as Compassion, we as Christ followers ought to believe and know that the church is God's chosen instrument to advance his purposes, to bring lasting hope and healing to those who desperately need it. And so the church has not just the calling, but also in many ways the credibility, the proximity, the capacity to meet the needs of their own communities. And so, we partner with churches who have been there before Compassion, are known and trusted, can understand not just the unique needs in their context, but the assets and the opportunities, and they have connections and relationships in ways that we're able to just come alongside and resource, as you said, and to equip them in doing what they're uniquely called to do. So to answer your question about dollars, so it's so interesting because there's how we raise the money as a charity, and then there's what you do with it, right? And it is important to understand the difference between the two. So we raise money through child sponsorship, and what we do with it is holistic child development. And so we have a very short line between the dollars here that go through our Global Ministry Center in Colorado to a local church in one of these 25 countries, who then uses that money from a sponsor to develop kids in 4 areas: spiritually, socially, physically, and cognitively. And so those resources go to ensure that that child is developed holistically, as Jesus was in Luke 2:52, which is the verse that this is all rooted in for us. It says, Jesus grew in wisdom, in stature, in favor with God, and in favor with man, which is spiritually, socially, physically, and cognitively.
That's amazing. Wow. And I'm thinking that those 2 million children actually represent a whole lot more people around the world, because when you have one child, so I'm thinking of the children that we sponsor.
Yeah.
And we as a family sponsor 2 children through Compassion, 1 through World Vision, 1 through Erdo. So we're kind of an ecumenical family, but I'll tell you, and I don't say that to brag, but I'm just thinking, this is where God has actually given us, I'm thinking that each one of those children is represented by a family.
Yes.
So there's probably at least 2 people involved in those children's lives.
Yeah.
And that would be also represented by a church and, and a community around them. And so I'm just kind of in the moment having this very real-time realization that what is it, like $41 a month? $41 a month is actually impacting not just one child, but is probably, I'm guessing conservatively, would be impacting probably about 5 people. Is that fair to say?
That's actually, we often say, yes, sponsoring one child impacts the entire family, who then influences and impacts families around them. So there is a ripple effect of change that actually we have a hard time measuring right now, but are asking that very question. How do we measure and express the depth of transformation that we're seeing well beyond this one child? But what we do know and have tracked historically is that for every child that comes to a place of faith and commitment in their faith to Christ, 4 people also are influenced to put their faith in Christ as well for every child in our program. So it is incredible.
4 to 1. So that's 5 people. You know,
look at you.
I'm not even good at math.
Do you want to come and be one of our data scientists or what?
No, I think it's remarkable. And I ask this not because I want this to be a sales pitch for compassion, but very genuinely, I don't think many of us understand how a sponsorship model actually works. Like we're familiar with it. We've grown up with TV ads about it and, we're familiar with it, but we don't know what it really does. Yeah. And so this is really, really helpful. And so I am realizing that as we talk, we're going to have 2 parts to this interview because I want to dive deep with Allison on her leadership and how God has uniquely called her. But I really do also want to talk about the person who preceded you at Compassion, because we both have an enormous fondness for him. You really have an appreciation for him.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I think messed with people's minds is that you had a 20-month succession period. And so, of course, being kind of on the outside of that, people probably didn't ask you all these questions. You probably heard some crazy things.
Oh, no, I heard some, yes.
But I had a lot of questions leveled at me. Like, people were kind of suspicious of it. Yeah. Like, were you not ready for leadership? Is that why they needed to do this? Yeah. Or, do they not? It's just, who knows? And I kept saying, like, to be really honest, and I've told you this, that the day that they announced that they were looking for a successor to Barry, I looked at my colleague here at work and I was like, it's gotta be Allison. Like Allison she lives and breathes this. And so like, for me, it seemed like a no-brainer. They had to go through due process though. And your board is extraordinary.
They're incredible.
And did really good work in doing due process. I'm so grateful that you're in this role. But okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Why 20? How come are you that slow? Did it take 20 months?
Are you that slow?
You're actually really sharp. So why 20 months?
Oh, I love your question, Ellen. Okay, so let's walk through this because there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, to Barry's credit, he has been thinking about transition and succession for a long time, actually close to a decade. And he would say that the greatest legacy that he wanted to leave in our organization was to transition well and to leave well and to set up a new leader well. In fact, he has articulated it as an act of worship, that as a steward of this ministry, one of the ways that he can worship God is to plan a strong departure to ensure the organization is protected. So he has been planning this very long time. As far as,
he's slow.
So let the record show.
He's also got a good sense of humor, so I can joke about that.
He's got a very good sense of humor. And he would say, maybe I'm a little bit slow.
That's good. He's intentional.
So the transition process that I have been on has actually been much longer than 20 months. I think, I haven't done an exact calculation, but probably about 3 years, perhaps, from the point of, let me tell you a story. Can I tell you a story?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so part of the due diligence in the transition was that our board was talking about what are the characteristics that we're looking for, where do we think God is calling the ministry to in the future, what will get us there. And so they spent a lot of time listening internally and externally. And in that, they met with all of the leaders. And first, Barry met with all the leaders to ask the question, what are we looking for? And then the board did. And he met with me last. And he asked the question, what do you think we need in a leader? And I had thought about it and had some pretty clear convictions around it. And he said, do you think we have, anyone here? And I said, well, like maybe, maybe this person, but probably not. I think actually in light of the magnitude of change that I sense God is calling us to in response to our changing context, that an external person that can bring this, and this to the role would be very wise. And he said, well, what if I told you that most other people said you? And I think I probably laughed and said, well, I think that would be silly. And then realized, okay, maybe I need to just not write this off like I did when God called me to compassion, which is a different story, but maybe submit myself to figuring out what God is doing here. So that was probably about 3 and a bit years ago.
And that's like, I feel like we just heard a secret.
Yeah, I think you might have actually just heard a secret.
But I'm really excited. Like, that's really cool because I trust wise leaders. And so for him to come to you and tell you that is incredible. What a gift.
Yeah.
He believed in you. That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I was on this track what felt independent of that when God called me into ministry called me to compassion in light of my passion for the cause and desire to really submit my leadership and submit what God has entrusted me with, whether it's my experience, my skill set, my vantage point, my circle of influence to his purposes. I wanted to submit myself to an equipping process. And again, having no sense that it would lead to be the leader of this organization, I felt like there were 3 key areas of equipping that God was calling me to, related to what I thought would be the different hats that a faith-based nonprofit leader would wear. The first being a shepherd and someone who really can lead in a ministry context and disciple their people. The second would be a practitioner, someone who can understand international development and the realities and complexities there. And the third is an executive, someone who can really lead from a cross-enterprise perspective and understand technology, marketing, sales, customer service kind of work.
This is a big hat.
I mean, when you break it into 3, you only have to wear one at a time, so it feels less daunting. But so I submitted myself to that equipping process. I went to seminary and
That's when I met you. You were going to Fuller, right?
Yeah, Fuller Theological Seminary, and did a Master of Arts in Global Leadership. I studied international development with an emphasis in urban studies, largely under Brian Fickert. And then eventually I went to Ivey Business School and did an MBA. Again, as part of my just submitting to what I felt like God had called me to. How does that relate to succession at Compassion? Is 2 things. Number 1, October 25th, 2019 was always Barry's date. We were working back from that date, the date that he planned to retire. And when the board decided and voted that I would be that next person, it was about 2 years before that date. But they wanted, because the decision became clear to them, they wanted to make that decision so that we could make those plans. I could relocate my family. And ultimately, I affirmed the timeline and the roadmap that Barry already had and said, this allows me to finish up my MBA, to relocate my family to a new city, and to have a posture of listening and learning from Barry and from our staff with this president-elect hat, knowing I would be the future leader. And so we moved forward with that plan, and it was a real gift to be afforded the opportunity to keep learning formally and then informally in the organization.
And I think, others may look at it and say, this is crazy. But I personally, and I know you've heard me say this before, I think it is a gift. And I think that you had an uncommon gift in having someone who is so well respected, and not just well respected publicly, but well respected by his people that he served. At Compassion. And that's so obvious, like at the succession event, it was so obvious that not just his peers globally, and not just his leadership team at Compassion, but Compassion as an organization so esteems Barry. And you got to learn from him. And I think this goes back to that early day, kind of ministry that you started in, was the gift of mentoring, not because of your age or your stage or anything like that, but because why not learn from someone wiser than you? It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. Why not?
Yeah. And here's the thing. I'm a learner is what I've realized. That may be no surprise.
Shocker. Yeah. How many, what were you studying in the last 4 years?
I know. And I'm an Enneagram 3 for those Enneagram folks. So the achiever. And
also not a shock.
Perhaps not. But you're right. Why wouldn't I want to not just take the posture, but the privilege to learn in a structured, unrushed way from a leader who's been leading, one of the largest faith-based charities in Canada he's been CEO for 25 years.
Incredible.
Been with the organization for 36 years. Why would I not want to glean as much as I possibly can? And what it really allowed me to do is lead our organization and our staff through a methodical process of looking back and understanding what are the markers along the way and the choices that we have made that led us to this point. And then where are we now? Where is God calling us to? And then what now shall we do? And to do that collectively with our staff, with both the past leader and the future leader walking together, I can say was a real gift to them as well.
And I know that you have said, and as have many others, that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. However, there's an intention that we don't just sit there and say, God equip me. And he did that with people for the tabernacle.
Yeah.
He did equip people, and he does do that to some extent. But at the same time, there's an enormous intentionality, not just in that you have the right education, or the right experience, but that you surround yourself with the right people. Is that fair to say? Oh. And surrounding yourself with Barry, and because I know some of the other leaders on your team, with those people as well.
Yeah.
That is, I think that is leading with a humility that is so healthy.
Yeah.
And a wisdom that is so healthy that is actually strengthening. Is that fair to say? Because some people would see that as threatening. And I think those were where some of the questions came from, why would they make her do that?
Oh,
and it was like a threat.
Oh.
Did anybody make you do this?
Yeah. First of all, the board basically gave me a green button that if I needed, if it was the right thing for the organization to make the transition faster, we could do that.
The green button that was eject Barry.
No, it should be the go button, not the red button, the green button.
Barry does have a good sense of humor.
Oh, he does. Thank goodness, Barry. We love you, Barry.
Yes.
To Barry's credit, he immediately, let me say this. Part of our initial conversations with our staff, we're talking about, what's not going to change and, keeping true to our mission, which of course is critical in a season of leadership transition. And then we realized that organizationally, unrelated to CEO succession, we were in a season where we needed to adapt and change and reinvent and redesign, reorganize to be able to accomplish what we sensed God was calling to us to accomplish in this next era, which meant we should start to prepare for that now. And so to Barry's credit, the message he gave to our staff is that it is not status quo, pause, wait, same. It is, let's launch forward and walk forward together. And so any decision that was future looking, he deferred to me immediately. And I, of course, did the best that I could to honor him and to look back and, to leverage his wisdom and his experience. But it was a year of progress and movement where I never felt, the organization wouldn't have felt held back in any way.
Incredible. And okay, we have so much more to cover, and we're going to do part 2 of this because I want to talk about your leadership. But I want to finish this. I want to wrap this one up. It's not going to be wrapped in a bow because we could talk for another hour just about compassion. Because I have a deep appreciation for the work of compassion. I really do. And I don't just say that because I get to do work for compassion, but I say that because I'm so grateful that I get to do work for compassion. I think you know that genuinely. I have such a deep appreciation. What's the future? What does the future look like for compassion? Yeah. Do you know? Can you say?
Well, here has been the privilege of this season of transition is that we, as a leadership team and a discerning community, which would be the way I would describe our leadership team, spent time seeking God's direction and guidance on what this next era looks like, and spent time praying and testing assumptions. And God really did converge our hearts and our minds around a vision for this next era. And, I talked earlier about the fact that we serve over 2 million kids living in poverty. And yet there are, by some counts, over 1 billion children still living in poverty. And so our work is not yet done. And so we believe that God is calling us to have 3 key areas of focus as we move forward. Work towards a world where every child can be afforded the opportunity to live a life free from poverty. Number 2, to engage every Christ follower in joining God in advancing his mission of justice and compassion in a way that prioritizes kids and the poor. And through the process, to see every life transformed. That compassion would be not just a bridge where we exchange resources, but a bridge to exchange relationships where both the resourced and the under-resourced church can grow together, can grow in their affection and the way they image the person of Christ, and can impact more and more lives around them. So every child, every Christ follower, every life changed.
Amazing. Oh, so much good to come. I'm excited for this next season. I have a deep appreciation for Barry and the work that he has done. And I want to say congratulations to you officially. Thank you. I'm so grateful to have you in this role as CEO and president of Compassion Canada. And so we are going to continue this conversation and we're going to talk about, we're going to go into some areas that I've warned you. We're going to talk a little bit about, this is going to sound really explosive, but we're going to talk about gender and demographics and leadership and what does it look like for a family and avoiding burnout and being healthy. And are you okay to go there?
You've given me no choice.
Okay,
so I will
you no choice
to the process.
So we're gonna wrap this one up, but then I want to make sure that everyone tunes into the next one. But check the show notes. We'll have information on Compassion Canada in the show notes, so you can visit there. And if you're not a sponsor of a child yet, this is a great opportunity. We sponsor 2 children who have the same birth year as our daughter, and that just allows her to grow up with them. And incredible things. So I do encourage you to engage. And if you have more money, I want to tell you that if you have $1,000, you can actually change the life. If you're a mama out there like me, you can actually change the life of another mother through a maternal health program. So you can go to the Compassion website. We'll have it linked below, but I want you to engage with this as much as you can and learn more about how you can be transformed as you transform someone else's life. Is that fair to say?
Amazing.
Sorry, I know this isn't a commercial, but I really want you to love these people as much as I do. So thanks for being here today, Allison. Super excited that you're here.
It was a joy. Thanks, Ellen.